this this particular workshop or training is titled Sustainable Production and Consumption. But what we will mainly deal with is the ESPR, the Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. Sorry, it's Sustainable Production Regulation by the EU, also by many commonly known simply as Eco Design. However, I wanted to first remind you that the idea of responsible consumption production it's not been invented, but certainly mainstreamed with the SDGs under SDG 12, but that this actually is quite an environmental goal amongst the SDGs. Whereas it's often one that we have seen in the fair trade movement a bit as a kind of unifying SDG where responsible production could be viewed, and consumption, of course, could be viewed as something that encompasses means for people participating in that production process to have sustainable and decent livelihoods. Başak, are you watching the waiting room?
Sure, yeah.
Thanks. Good. Nevertheless, if we look at the indicators of SDG 12, it is pretty much an environmental goal and has primarily environmental concerns. Maybe not so much in the narrative because it is called responsible and not sustainable consumption and production, at least in the title. But once you dig deeper into it, it's more about sustainability in the green sense rather than in the social and green sense. We have to remember. And same goes for the eco design. And this is an important point to keep in mind. Now, still, we do believe that as fair trade businesses, it would be a little bit easier to approach. And also, I think that's a little bit what lies in the decision, which I am sure is conscious, that SDG 12 talks about consumption before production. In one view, it could be seen as putting a little bit the responsibility on consumers to ask companies to produce the right things, which would then lead to responsible production. Now, of course, in the fair trade movement, we are catering a little bit to this view by still engaging in sustainability responsibility as a voluntary process and borne by consumers wanting to buy products from you as fair trade businesses. Huh? Now, I do want, however, to just have everybody think about some of the issues that comes with that focus. But also that it speaks to the fact that the fair trade movement as one that has been very consumer facing and looking very much to make the case for consumers to consume responsibly, we fit well into that narrative. Yes, and then, sorry, another point I want to make, of course, which is also on the slide, is that the SDG 12 does not say explicitly, but does hint at the need to change business models. And we believe that WF2 members for certain, because this is part of the criteria by which you are verified, already demonstrate different types of business models that are alternative to the mainstream and which fit better and are much more able to adapt to what is needed to have a responsible production to facilitate responsible consumption, of course. Now, looking a little bit more at eco-design, I want to make sure that a few of the important basic points are clear to you all. The first point is that it's an EU regulation and not a directive. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the distinction between the two. I'm also certain that some of you are not. A regulation is something put into force and enforced by the Commission. So it's a little bit about where the mandate and the competence lies within the EU system. A directive, however, is directing member states on how their legislation should enforce this or that measure, let's say. So it's important to understand that the eco-design has little to do with how member states implement it, which is different from the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD or CSDDD, however you want to phrase the abbreviation. I'm saying both because some people do indeed know it mainly as CSDDD and would not directly understand CSDDD, and the other way around. So it's not to try to be long that I put it this way. I hope you'll understand. Now, but as I say, this has a little bit to do, like this is important for us to understand in how this is enforced, and that we don't have to wait for member states to develop national laws that are supposed to reflect the eco design. We can take it directly from the EC. Nevertheless, it also means that this is not, so to speak, a direct law. It comes from delegated acts approved and implemented by the Commission. Now, hopefully that will make sense in a short while. But when we look at the, let me see, actually. Yeah, no, I don't think it's stated directly on the slides that are coming after, so I'll just say it now. But it is related to somewhat what comes next. The eco design is more like a framework, and the criteria that companies will have to abide by comes then from measures and delegated acts that are being defined as we speak. So these are not yet finalized, but are still work in progress. And they relate to then what I'm showing here, that eco-design requirements will fall into two categories, some on information and some on performance. So part of the eco-design is about reporting. Now, I think that's probably known to some of you at least already at this point. But of course, originally, it would sound as if the eco-design is all about criteria for how the product is produced, not so much about what you tell people about how it's produced or what its composition is. Now, the intention behind eco-design is, of course, one of, again, primarily green sustainability, and fits with the training we had last week on circularity, like circular economy, because it is an attempt to impose circular economy for companies placing products on the EU market. Now, maybe I'm jumping a bit between things, but let me just make it very clear. Obligations for this regulation lie with any company, any actor that place a product on the EU single market. So they don't have to be based in the EU, but so long as they are exporting to the EU or otherwise selling to consumers within the EU single market, obligations apply. You can view it as if any products that enter into the borders of the EU countries, member states, will have to fulfill these requirements, or there will be penalties. But as I said before, this is very much about trying to introduce circularity and circular economy practices into a more mainstream economy. Now, as with much EU legislation, the ambitions are very lofty and big, but the implementation, let's say, rarely manages to achieve those lofty aims. We have to be clear. So please don't assume that requirements will be extremely tough. There will certainly be changes that will involve, costs and extra work for almost any actor on the EU market. But the EU, especially now, is very keen to not make life too difficult for businesses in general. So we can assume that this will be, quite doable, especially for businesses like I think most of yours that already have, or let's say, are already used to working with practices that look more deeply into the conditions under which your products are produced and have certain standards that mainstream businesses, in most cases, do not. But what are we looking at in terms of the criteria that we can expect on performance? That is, are certain, things that will fall under circular economy, so like recycled content or repairability, ability to upcycle the product after end of, well, maybe not end of life, but certainly end of use of the first buyer. Energy performance, yeah, as I said, recyclability, and then of course durability, that products should last longer. I think I'll get to that in a bit, but you can see how parts of these have very, very specific aims in very specific sectors. Now, the scope of eco-design for now are especially, but not necessary, but not limited to, textiles and especially apparel, but not, as I write here, home textiles and footwear. At least they are not a priority for the moment. Furniture, toys, and pulp and paper. And then, of course, as we will see in a bit, a lot of it is very heavily tailored to electronics. Makes sense. A lot of industrial waste these days comes from textiles and from electronics in particular, but not all, of course. Food and feed, however, are exempt. And okay, that may seem quite intuitive, although food waste is also certainly an issue, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. Now, the current framework for the eco-design was approved in April last year. However, as we mentioned, criteria and requirements are under development, and they are fully according to plan, under development this year and next year. And they are being developed with the input of a panel, a forum, they call it the Eco-Design Forum, of which the FTAO, the Fair Trade Advocacy Office that is representing us and Fair Trade International towards the EU institutions, has a seat at that panel and are helping advise the Commission. Now, of course, maybe I don't want to overstate the influence that they can have on the criteria as they come out, but certainly, as we will show you also later, they are bringing a lot of points that are very important for companies like yours and for WTO members in general to the attention of the EC. And there is a likelihood that many of these will be taken into account, at least. Also because we, at the same time, together with the FTAO, are engaging with other parties who have similar aims and similar advocacy points that they are lobbying the Commission for, especially under the eco-design. I will make a few examples as we go on. The entry into force is expected in 27 and 28. So this is still up and coming also, as you will see. The criteria then to us are not yet known, at least not fully. But we have good enough indication that we know what companies like yours and what WTO members in general should begin looking into and should be paying attention to as the criteria will be finalized. Okay, there's a framework already because, as I said, the eco-design itself is yet just a framework, and then the criteria to be enforced are then to be implemented as we go along in these 2 years, 25 and 26. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this already. I think I shared, or maybe Başak did last time. I'm not sure. Either way, you can see both by the color division that they are a bit supposed to look at the reduce, reuse, recycle kind of division within circular economy, sorry. But also some of it is very clearly that's maybe not by color necessarily, but some of it's very clearly looking at textiles, some of it very clearly looking at electronics, for example. Durability and repairability, maintenance and refurbishment, okay, could apply to both textiles and electronics, of course, or furniture, many other products as well. But looking a little bit deeper, it's clear that part of these criteria in particular are looking at how to avoid the kind of intentional increased degradability of electronics that we know there have been among some companies and influential actors in the market to entice people to buy more electronics at a faster pace than they otherwise would. Part of this also looks a little bit at software at some point, but of course that we won't get into. However, it is also relevant for textiles, of course, heavily, and apparel, fashion in general, whether that be accessories or garments. And even footwear, of course, although, as I said, for now, footwear is not really covered. However, what is especially in the scope of, or in the, what you would say, like behind the intentions of the Commission, is also to ban destruction of unused, unsold products, which is a big issue in textiles, of course, or in fashion. So it's a kind of way to try to limit the worst excesses of fast fashion. But of course, actually, I was a bit surprised to learn that as well. This does take place in electronics too, and I'm sure for other types of products as well. So some of it you can clearly see where the original intention lies and what the background is. But please bear in mind that it still affects other product categories than those originally aimed for. Good. Maybe I will just mention that broadly speaking, amongst the many criteria, the intention behind is also to, well, I mentioned that a little bit, but what I think is gives us a specific advantage when we look at these criteria is that they are supposed to challenge the low margin, high volume models that are prevalent in garments and especially, of course, fast fashion, but also in electronics, as well as in many other markets. Of course, it's not just for these, but these are just two great examples of the excesses of that. And that, although I do understand that some fair trade businesses also have a type of low margin, high volume model of business, there is a higher, let's say, part or share of WTO members, at least, I would say, where it's more aiming at a higher margin with less volume. Although I know that there can be challenges to such a model, especially because producers also do live from repeated sales, of course, or at least, let's say, a high volume of sales, which is the original aim of many of your businesses. This is an advantage, I would say, for most WTO members, because it will mean that mainstream actors have to scale down a little bit on the most extreme versions of this type of model, which will help level the playing field with fair trade businesses, WTO members, and so on, who of course cannot compete on price to the extent that more mainstream actors do. And so, but already, of course, competing with mainstream actors who have, a very extreme version of low margin, high volume models. And so there will be less cost for the transition of fair trade businesses, WTO members who already have alternative models to this type of business, compared with more mainstream competitors. And that will improve the level of competitiveness for fair trade businesses, for businesses like yours. I'm also stating that it's an opportunity for businesses immersed in their value chains. This is a way to say, of course, the way that many of you have very, very close relationships and collaborations with your producers on how products are produced and how they're working, because that's the way you can monitor that things take place under fair trade conditions. The eco-design is supposed to push companies along the path of having the same level of engagement in their supply chains. It doesn't really manage to push them all the way, of course. We have to be clear about that. Um, but they will be forced to take some steps that many of you are already used to taking uh, to have better control over the production of products and to ensure less waste production and better fit with demand from supply, or that supply better fits demand instead of a huge supply trying to increase demand. Um, and that's where I believe that, we in the project believe of the Gateway to Fair Trade Fashion project believe that there is a big opportunity for you members and of WTO and fair trade businesses in general that already are used to and have a lot of these practices, even more than the mainstream business will have to implement from the eco design. Now, of course, I do understand that this is not just meaning that you can sit back and relax. There'll have to be some changes also in the way you, maybe not the way you operate your supply chains, but in the way perhaps producers make certain products, and certainly some of the information that they or you collect in that process. So we are trying to give you the first indications of this today. And then once the criteria are clearer, WFTO Europe, for example, will also help communicate that to members more clearly. That is, of course, something we can only really expect next year at some point. Hopefully sooner, but in the case of the Commission, it most likely will be later. Yeah, so for now, we're just, instead of waiting only until we have complete clarity, giving you the best indications that we have so that you can already begin preparing. Now, sorry, this is much of what I perhaps said already, but some of the substantiation of why I believe this is easier to deal with for fair trade businesses and WTO members in particular, simply because you are used to having closer producer collaboration. And you're already, some of you, I understand, not all of you, are focusing on environmental practices. But certainly all of you are focusing on producer capacity building, because this is also a big part of what will be challenging, I think, or at least more challenging for the more mainstream part of the economy, will be capacity building with producers. And then, as with other legislation, we always try to make the case to the Commission. And I truly believe that in the eco design regulation, this is clearer. A lot of the implementation will rely on the capacity of producers, and also whether the producers, I mean, not necessarily just in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of do they have the necessary labor power, or are they able to pay people well enough that they need to implement certain and help collect certain types of data. Businesses that pay their producers better than the mainstream will have a much easier time with this. Their producers will be, your producers in this case, will, in my best estimation, be much more ready and able to respond and make changes necessary, collect different data, or introduce certain extra steps in the design process. Because they are not so squeezed by very, very low and small margins, as you would see on the more mainstream market. At least this is the case within fashion and textiles. And the benefits we are foreseeing from this regulation also that it will be easier for big brands and retailers to work with businesses like fair trade businesses, WTO members, because you're much more used to adapt to this kind of maybe not this type of regulation, but certainly the types of interventions that would be needed in the supply chain, and introducing extra measures and extra practices. You're used to this, you'll be much more reliable. And in some cases, like, it's simply a matter of changing some of the information that you collect and reporting it in the right way. We'll look at that in a minute. But also towards consumers, like, I will again maybe say that there is, like, sustainability and so on have a little bit of a harder time on the mainstream market these days, because there is a bit of a crisis atmosphere. in much of Europe. Nevertheless, the trends from the past many years is very clear, and no matter what the crisis situation or perception is amongst consumers in Europe, the most concerning issue for young people these days is still the climate crisis. And so, being able to demonstrate a higher compliance with environmental regulation and a stronger environmental profile, along with a social one, will give you a stronger brand, a stronger unique selling point, also with consumers. And then we also expect that compared to more mainstream businesses, your implementation cost will probably be lower. Of course, that's maybe a little bit of a risky statement because it's not necessarily the case. Depends on your business. But as I said, you are used to the kind of practices that will be necessary to uphold this. So you will, compared to some mainstream businesses, have an easier time with this simply, which is also why you will be viewed as more lucrative to work with from certain retailers' point of view, at least. Okay, delving a little bit more into some of the content we have here, I will look at 3 different ones. Let's see. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm not exceeding my time. Başak will also speak to you not long from now. I want to look a little bit deeper into 3 different criteria. We could look at many different ones. For now, these are the ones we assume will be more relevant for US members to prepare for. And then also maybe I will mention that we intend to publish toolkits that on the different trainings and webinars that we will have in this series with the Gateway to Fairer Fashion project. So the one last week on circular economy, the one today, the one 2 weeks from now on deforestation regulation, and then there'll be one in January on which delves a little bit more into the CSDDD, CSDDD. And so they will go a bit more into detail and will highlight a bit more concretely some potential practices that we have seen in the membership that would make it easier to prepare for this kind of regulation. Now, looking at recycled content, I'm highlighting this because although the definition is yet unclear, there's likely to be requirements for how much recycled content there must be in a product. It depends on the product type, of course, what that will be. And although some of you already work with upcycling, I don't know if it's any of you that are present right now, but we know some WTO members work with upcycling, for example, of saris in India, or even plastic waste that is then upcycled, reused for as the raw material for certain products. Actually, I believe, Jeremy, in your case, plastic waste is now in one of your very popular lines. So that's a good example, for instance. There are also some of you that do not work with recycled materials at all. Of course, maybe we could look at cotton as one that is, not as easily recyclable as, for example, polyester. So those that work more with cotton materials probably will have issues if there's a minimum requirement for recycled materials in their product. And here, our best indication is that to be inspired by those that already reuse used clothing for the raw materials, for example, which could be a way to make sure that there is some recycled content in the products. But also, maybe I can ease your concerns a little bit that there are, of course, some products where this does not make sense. And so we can expect that the picture will be a little bit varied. But we do encourage you to really rethink your sourcing already now and look into what options are available. We know from previous workshops and previous work with both WTO members but also non-members, that accessing recycled materials for textiles especially can be difficult depending on the size of the member, or the size of the company, sorry, I should say in this instance. Um, Either the recycled raw material sourcing would involve very big industry actors, so it doesn't become very sustainable after all in one instance, or it's financially out of reach, or logistically out of reach if the company is based in a rural place, for example. However, there are some in those specific cases where they then collect used garments from the community, for example. Again, I'm sure that some of you present here today at least know about some of the WTO members in India who collect old saris and rework them into new clothing or bags or other type of accessories or products. So that is one relatively available way to rethink your sourcing, for example, or look for raw materials. I mean, here amongst your producers, in the case of at least those that I see today, but of course also for those that might see the recording that are producers themselves within the WTO community. This is also a way that could be an approach that could be applied. However, I must also warn you about the tracing requirements that will be that will come into force as part of this, which are linked to the digital product passport. Here we are also looking a little bit to you for recommendations or experience with certain practices. One issue that comes from the traceability is perfectly possible even when you collect old garments from the community where your business is based, as we know some WFT members do. However, it may not always be desirable to note the addresses of people who gave their old saris, for example, and have them sign personally, although that would be, for example, a way to meet the tracing requirements. We have a little bit the same issue with tracing to factory level if members are working with those types of producers that work from home, for example. So a bit more like cottage industry, which we also know is prevalent, especially in India and Bangladesh, for example, Nepal, I believe as well. Here we would also like to have your feedback, you here today and producers more generally, on any ways you can see that we could go around this. That means we can still trace it to factory level, if so to speak, but we are not disclosing the private addresses of anyone, and not even preferably collecting it. Now, maybe I should also make sure not to raise your concerns here. We don't assume that the digital product passport will go that deep into detail. But it is possible that in terms of documenting the traceability, this kind of information might need to be collected, unless we can find a good alternative. So this is, let me say, both hopefully an inspiration for how you can prepare for the criteria, but also one where we are very keen to have feedback from you members on how we can, based on your experiences, maybe come up with a better solution than simply advising you to also collect that type of information, which could be infringing on the privacy of your producers. Good. Going forward, let me see. And just to say, Başak, also if you can check the chat for any questions, I prefer to take them towards the end, but we can, if there are any that refers to what exactly I'm speaking of at the time, sure. We can also make sure to address it before it becomes before the discussion or the presentation changes subject completely. But moving on to durability. Now this is one where we are, this one and then the next criteria, where we are expecting a few challenges that we'd like to prepare you for. Um, Now, this can be viewed very much as referring to electronics, but in terms of fashion and textiles, of course, resistance to stress, repairability, uh, like a minimum of how long the product lasts, um, are very relevant as well. Um, Let me say some of the concerns that we have, like if we talk about resistance to stress, for example, uh, and this comes also from environmental impact that, or sorry, my environmental footprint that comes as the next criteria that we're looking at. We are expecting that polyesters and similar synthetic fibers may score higher here and may be favored by the eco design a little bit in the way that it's looking now. This is because many actors in the industry are already using scores and assessment models where synthetic fibers receive a higher score because they are more resistant, simply. They are more durable. And more, it is assumed, recyclable, but more on that in a moment. However, once we look into repairability, minimum of durability, maybe minimum of durability, again, polyesters could have a higher score here. Okay, it's maybe not so concerning when we talk about repairability, for example. This more in terms of repairability will have to do with the design of the products, that that you make them more modular, for example, that parts can be easily replaceable. Again, this is maybe very clearly made with electronics in mind. You imagine maybe the Fairphone, as some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, where you have the motherboard, but then you can add and take away certain components, so you don't have to need to buy a new phone just because you want to change the camera, for example, or the battery. However, in terms of textiles, there are certain ways, of course, that the repairability can be increased in terms of simplicity of design, less intricate work. Now, again, this has to be paired, of course, with how you make the product desirable to your market base and your consumers. Depends on, of course, which country the products are sold in. I'm sure you're all aware. But I also know that many WFTO producers, members, um, especially those in the European market, work closely with producers on design that sells better in Europe. So you're already involved at the design phase, and so this is just a consideration that should be integrated um, into that phase of the work with producers. But it's one that will really make the difference because a lot of the eco design will center around this. How long does a product last? Again, trying to reduce the pace at which consumers buy new all the time. And so also on repairability, from a different way of designing the products in the first place, I think will be one of the points that gives a high added value and a better score under the eco design regulation. So this is one where increased focus should be. Less so maybe on the exact composition of the fibers, although this will also be a concern in terms of the numbers of materials and components used. And also because remember that mixed fibers, as Başak told you last week, are nearly impossible to upcycle or recycle. And so more simplicity in materials, of course, is also something you should think about. That also comes from the environmental footprint. This is also known to some of you maybe already as PEF, because which comes from product environmental footprint and specific and consideration within the eco design. One that is very much in focus, also in advocacy circles these days, because as I mentioned just before, synthetic fibers may be favored over natural fibers, at least in the way we see that more mainstream companies are um, assessing their raw materials these days in terms of longevity, durability. Their synthetic fibers are some oftentimes scoring higher, and then some companies, instead of questioning this, are just saying, okay, then we just change all everything into polyesters. Now, of course, I think that many WTO members would object to this and have a specific. It's ingrained in your brand to work with natural fibers and also sometimes heirloom materials, cotton in India, for example. Um, I don't see, let me say, this will be a concern, and it's something to actively be aware of and try to counter. We are doing our best, and we know that there are other groups doing advocacy towards the EU that wants to raise this point very specifically, simply because it is, you know, again, as with some other EU regulation that you might know of, green stamp, like giving a rubber stamp of sustainability to something that clearly is not sustainable. We have pretty good arguments on that. If you look at the holistic emissions of production of synthetic fibers, they don't by far come close to the emissions, the low emissions of cotton that is grown in the correct way, at least. But it's a very hard perception to fight. So just to say, we also want to hear your practices on the way you work with materials, so we can, because it can help us counter this narrative. And also, there's a big point on end of life management, because polyesters just don't decay; they just become microplastics. So fortunately, hopefully, that will be a big argument also, because one of the other eco-design criteria looking at microplastics particularly. Also, we know from some producers that work with recycling polyester specifically, that in the recycling, in the re-spinning process of unraveling a cloth into to reusable polyester fibers, a lot of microplastics is released from the friction, becomes like this kind of polyester dust, which is in the first instance very unhealthy for the people working with it, but certainly also very bad for the environment. So we have already brought a lot of these concerns to the EU, but keep this in mind, but do not make you lose faith in the materials you're already using, but make sure that you document and build the narrative together with us for why they are better than, why they are durable, why they contribute to longer use of the products. This is another narrative that has that we are pushing, that non-synthetic and especially tailor-made textiles, garments simply are more comfortable, and so will be used for longer by consumers instead of becoming part of this impulsive purchasing behavior. There are studies that substantiate this also, that we are relying on, but your practices, if you share them with us, can help us build this narrative. And remember to use that narrative as well towards your buyers and towards your consumers. This will be part of it, and you will have to probably make that case when you have to comply with the eco-design requirements in 2 years from now, or 3. Good. Let me just say, I just have a little bit left, and then Başak will take over, at least for now. But I want to, because I'm sorry, I tend to be a bit long, and I've already taken quite long.
It's quite okay. Don't worry.
Okay, good. But I wanted to cover the digital product passport as well. Here we are looking more at the information requirements over the performance requirements. But of course, this is supposed to, again, ensure not just that the products uphold certain requirements in terms of how they are made, that should make them more sustainable, but also you can see here the intention is very much to facilitate that consumers make the right choice based on the right information. Again, maybe you could say that it's uh, assumption that leaves a lot to be wanted still, unfortunately, in today's markets. But okay, we cannot maybe deny that more information to consumers increases the likelihood that they will make the right choices, let's say. Um, Again, the original regulation is a framework that should be established by the end of this year, and then the information and the operation of a digital product passport should be mandatory by mid 2027. There will be always 4 unique identifiers in every product. A unique identifier for the product itself, so it can be traced. Economic operator, that's the person, the company that places it on the market. The facility, so the producers, and then a registration identifier, which is not public. This relates a bit more to how the digital product passport is operated. And let me just mention the digital product passport is intended to be that every product carries a QR code, which can be scanned by consumers, and then they immediately, through a shared platform operated by the EU, are able to receive certain information in compliance with the eco-design regulation about the product's origin, production method, and its score, for example. So again, we don't know for certain which it will be and which it won't be, and exactly how it will be. But we have good indication that there will be the following: a repairability score, a durability score, points on carbon footprint, and then information on how the product can be reused, recycled, or disposed, along with, of course, things like how do you wash this product, for example, if it's a textile or garment, to improve its longevity, to make sure it lasts longer. There are certain considerations you have to take into account. That is easier on the fibers so that it doesn't wear and tear as quickly. I'm sorry to English speakers here if that's not a common and grammatically correct phrase, but I hope you understand the point. Again, the exact criteria for this will be laid out in the years to come. We are already assisting the FTAO with information on how they should advise the Commission, also for the digital product passport. And so, as I said, we will include this in the email that follows up to this webinar training. But we wanted to ask also from you if you have any experience with how you trace your products to factory level, and how we can avoid maybe that we go so close that it's necessary to have like the names of people from whom you collected the saris or the other textile used textiles for reuse or upcycling, and how and how we can avoid having to trace all the way down to the actual place of production, which could be somebody's home if you use producers that work from home. Again, in all likelihood, the indications we have, the information to consumers will not be that specific and detailed. But there might be still a necessity to collect this kind of information for traceability purposes, for like documentation purposes. So this is why we want to make sure we have, good arguments towards the Commission for why maybe this is not the way to ensure traceability, but there are other ways that traceability can be ensured, and it will still be as reliable. I mean, again, or let's say perceived reliable, as when a big multinational makes sure that there is a chain of custody, for example, for their products that ensures traceability, which is a bit easier maybe if you use big factories and workshops, as is the case in certain textile supply chains. Good. Now, another point maybe I want to make is that hopefully should ease your concerns is that for the digital product passport, there will be support for SMEs, for those active in manufacturing, so those that are actually producing. It's not clear yet if it will be, oh, well, sorry, it is clear that some of it will be at EU level and some of it will be at member state level, and includes guidance that you can ask them for, requests from either the EC or for a member state government. There are targeted trainings envisioned, and in certain cases, financial support for the tools necessary for compliance, or some for the necessary capacity building. Now, what is lacking here, of course, is support for those producers that are outside the EU. This is again already a case we are making to the EC. We had an event specifically on this back in June at the European Parliament with MEPs that are involved in the ESPR regulation, the eco design regulation, and also on the digital product passport. As well as there, the same event, we had a representative from the European Commission that has been working in the team that develops some of the criteria and developed the framework for the digital product passport. But again, we ask you to please give us as much feedback on your own practices as we can, and especially on the gaps you see for non-EU based producers to still comply with the requirements of the digital product passport and especially its operation. As I said, there is a shared platform operated by the EC that will be part of this, the IT infrastructure. And it's supposed to be as simple as possible to ensure that it will not require a lot of maintenance to operate, or that will not require a lot of people maintaining it to operate. And so there is also a part where the data is derived from. Hosting the data itself is expected to be done by the companies putting the product on the EU market. And that means that for you that are either selling directly in the EU or those who are producing and exporting to the EU, either you yourself will have to find the right infrastructure for hosting the information and uploading and making sure it's up to date and etc. Or the buyer that you have in Europe will have to do so. I think in some cases buyers will have a larger system where they manage this, and it will maybe be a little bit easier to simply sell to them if you are a smaller producer outside the EU. But this is also something that we'll try to go into more detail with in the toolkit, but also later on, this is something where we can more easily provide updated information once it becomes clear exactly how it's supposed to be operated. Good. I have now something on the green claims. Başak, do you want me to just go over it now? Okay, good. And then it's your turn. Good. So on the green claims, just 1 second. Now, as I mentioned already in last week's webinar, we have to assume that the green claims is abandoned. It was approved by the three different parties in the European legislature, the Commission, the European Parliament, and then the Council, which is made up of the member states, all have a position on it, but it hasn't gone to trial. And so we can assume that I mean, this is where they make the final version based on the three positions. So it's most likely that this will never come into existence. Maybe that is not so bad because some of the requirements there were quite challenging we would assume for many smaller operators and smaller companies, like the majority of maybe the WTO membership, especially for those outside the EU who would not have access to technical support or guidance from the European Commission, for example, or from the EU member state. So, okay, but still we are a bit concerned about this because it comes in the broader, let's say, trend towards cutting green legislation, which is bad for also some of the more environmentally concerned of us in the fair trade movement in general, of course. And it also means that, okay, it will certainly not help level the playing field with more mainstream companies. However, some of the provisions and requirements in the Green Claims Directive are carried on in this, we abbreviate as EMCO, Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive. Now, going back to what I said in the very beginning, these are directives, so they have to be implemented and enforced by the member states, not centrally by the European Commission. And so generally, we will have to wait for the transposition, the process of member states drafting national legislation in accordance with the directive, and then starting to enforce that, which will take place next year. I mean, there is a deadline for March where the law has to be written into member state law, and then in September it becomes applicable and enforceable by member states. But the member states will have to enforce it, so there can be a difference in how they interpret some of the rules and how they handle the enforcement. Now, some of you will maybe have heard that there is a concern that because of the way that WTO verifies the claims of its members by third-party audits, could not maybe exactly meet the criteria of the Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition Directive on certification schemes. But just to say, this is something that we're looking into, and there is, in all likelihood, and a solution to be found, and it's not necessarily as concerning as it would seem. But we are taking very seriously. This is not what I really want to say about this, but it's of course one important thing that I should mention. But it also means that, again, this directive is very much a green directive over a social directive, or let's say a more holistic view of sustainability as green and social. So the fair trade movement is likely to be less impacted, but it will mean that claims on that products are sustainable or environmentally friendly and so on and so forth, both cannot be too generic. So, for example, environmentally friendly or eco-friendly will no longer be accepted as a claim on packaging and in marketing for products in the EU from September next year. Other more specific claims will still be allowed so long as there is sufficient backing for it, where certification schemes come into the picture. So this is already something that we advise you to look at. If you generally work with sustainability of your products and also market yourself that way to consumers, make sure you look into exactly which type of claims you're making. Make sure they are specific enough and make sure that you can substantiate them. In most cases, there is a need for external certification of it. For example, for textiles, it could be the GOTS certification on organic textiles, for example. But there are other schemes and attempt to be quite specific. There are, of course, here, and this is important to mention, that it means that there are certain aspects that the WTO's guarantee system could in any case not cover when they become very environmentally specific. Now, I know there are people in the membership who would who are calling very much for this to be included or covered somehow in the WTO guarantee system. But we have to, of course, admit maybe that we are originally a social movement, and that environmental points, I also do believe personally, should be included, but that this is, part of a longer process that have to be taken in agreement with all members. This is how the guarantee system and the requirements are made and changed. But this is, of course, a direction that could be taken. However, I will just mention that if some of your claims are very environmentally specific, it is not realistic to rely on the WTO label. You should probably look at, I mean, that would even be the case for the Fair Trade International label as well, and other labels that fall into the fair trade family, if you will, Fair for Life, for example. Natural and Fair as well. And Natural and Fair, of course, was originally an organic certification scheme. So they may be falling a bit into a different category, but they are also mainly concerned with food. So for most of you present here today, this is in any case not relevant. But it's just an example, let's say, and none of them would really cover environmental claims, except when there is, for example, an organic label part of it. And again, that's mostly for foods, for example. So that's why we do advise you that to look at if it's necessary to take other schemes to substantiate very specific claims, at least if you want to continue claiming points on environment. Again, in the toolkit, we can go a little bit more into detail with this. But since the picture is very varied amongst members and amongst fair trade businesses, it's hard to give in such a short time as today a very specific advice. And certainly there will not be one size fits all. Good. So, but Başak, now I believe it is your turn, unless there are any burning questions we can just address in the minute, sorry, immediately is what I'm trying to say. Let's see. Good. I see that Maria Mataradona asks regarding recycled content, do you know if guidelines will include not mixing materials, thinking about future recyclability? The short answer is no, I do not know for sure. But the indications we have is yes, that they want to move away from mixing materials, also because of the horrible like the horrible history they have of not being recyclable and reusable. That's why I'm also suggesting that you look more at, let's say, clean raw materials, less composition. And in the case, I know that some WTO members are using, for example, certain types of cotton only for their products. Okay, just trying to tell you that maybe actually have already made life a little bit easier for yourselves, and that's something that you can emphasize when you make the case and when you document your practices under the framework of the eco design, for example. So even if we don't know, I would advise you highly that you think about not mixing materials to the extent that it's possible. At least, I mean, in terms of the fibers. I mean, if you think about your garments in a modular way, of course you can mix different materials, just so long as they are not mixed into the same weave. I'm sure there will be possibilities to have still mixed materials. I would not be surprised if some big lobby groups insist that that should still be possible. But I would maybe not advise you to keep doing so if you are already, but rather try to avoid it going forward. I think, Başak, maybe you have a bit more, some points on this.
Mikkel, actually, I intended to present the circular textile strategy and also provide some brief information
Okay.
on the Waste Framework Directive and the waste shipping regulation. But I think since we have less than 20 minutes, maybe we can move to the self-check at the
Okay, let's do that. But if you can include that at the end, it might be good as well.
Yeah, but if we don't have time, I can actually present that content at the next webinar.
Okay. Very good. So let's do so we have a small exercise, and maybe also it won't take so long given that there are not so many right now here present. We have a QR code here for a Mentimeter with some questions that we please like you to answer. And based on that, we can both get some information us for our advocacy work and for further advice towards you. Sorry, I'll post the link in the chat as well. That's what I'm looking for. But hopefully it can also help you get an indication of what kind of questions you have to and what kind of considerations you have to use in your daily work to prepare for the eco design. So let me just find the link if you can't use the QR code. It is. Good. There's the link to the Mentimeter, if you can please. But then maybe while people are looking into this, we can see if we can still answer other questions. Let's see. I see Isabella says blockchain is a good solution. One of our members in Armenia is already experimenting with. Naturally, for traceability, blockchain is probably going to be a very common and very useful tool. Again, if any of you are already using this, please share, and it will make it easier for us to give concrete practices to other members. Regarding high scores for polyester and textile industry, are we considering microplastics released during washing and effects as well on skin of users? I'm hoping so. I don't know, Başak, if you have more information on that. Because this is at least one of the things that have been raised, that microplastics are released, especially during washing, for example, which is also why we are challenging that this has a higher, let's say, environmentally friendly score amongst assessment by current industry players, simply because it's more quote unquote durable.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you. I was checking the Mentimeter if it's working, but
Yeah.
I checked with my phone. I think has anyone using it well, or
anyone experiencing issues?
I don't get any response. I've started it, but yeah.
The link I have also doesn't give the possibility to give answers. That's the problem.
Yes, I've just started the session, but somehow doesn't work.
You don't have a, yeah.
We are able to see it, and I could also reach to this question answers, but I don't know how to reply. Are we supposed to reply now?
Yes.
Yes, that was the intention. There is a way. There is like a specific link that is shared once you start it. You don't see that, Başak?
Yes, it says start session, and I click on it. And
do you not get like a link for sharing?
No, I just see a plain window, but I don't see how to comment, or I don't know why it's not happening.
It's written here on the above view only.
Yeah. No, I think if you don't mind, Başak, maybe you can, since this is being recorded, maybe we can, as Maria is suggesting, send the Mentimeter by email. We can make this into a bit of a longer process, hopefully involving more people. But if you can then present on the textiles instead at this point, that would be.
Or maybe we can indeed show the questionnaire and discuss it together. The survey is on Word as well, because Mentimeter works only when everyone uses at the same time.
Okay. Yeah,
So
or we
we
can make
can
that
just
into a survey.
show the content of the self-check and discuss it all together.
Okay, I can share it. Mm. But you all see the questions at least, so please look through them in the Mentimeter while I'm finding the document.
Yes, I have it ready. If you want, I can share it.
Okay, please do so.
Yeah.
And I believe there is a way to, yeah, zoom in if you don't see it big enough in on your screen.
Yes, actually, we wanted to make it a bit more interactive with the Mentimeter, but still, we are able to discuss it all together. If you would like to share the actions you take or how you are planning to respond to the Green Deal processes in the European market. So we wanted to understand if there are any specific processes or actions you already took to enhance sustainability in your businesses with the first question. Any attempts, any plans? Have you already assessed your environmental impact? Are you collecting environmental data such as like water use, energy efficiency? Is there any intention to move towards renewables or, using transportation methods that are not fossil fuel based? So these are actually the actions that you might have already thought about or taken steps forward. Is there any move towards the expected sustainability actions or any ideas?
Well, it's very interesting, and we have to work on it. But so far, because we are making crafts, jewelry, and accessories, and we are making sure that we only use the natural material. So that is the real goal right now. But since our quantities, volumes are not high, and we are not in a huge way in the like textiles industry, what's happening there. But so far we have reached that we have to make that the materials are as per the REACH standards or as European Union standards, and also as much as natural. So we have that is what we are busy at the moment. But to get the data or statistics, I think it just still we have to work on it. That's where we stand.
Yes, especially when we, think about the digital product passport and when we will be discussing the value chains in the following webinars, we really need to focus on the current data and how we can improve our environmental footprint so that, we will be able to appealing or fulfilling some requirements of the European market that is required from the products that are going to enter to the market by 2030.
Yeah, exactly. We need to work very hard in this direction. Of course, we are also thinking how we can use as much as a renewable solar system, for solar energy. So, in our work, and how we can work with the minimum use of electricity. So that is also, and how the more handwork is involved. So I think that's also one step in this direction. And of course, EUDR and all this is going on, and we are still looking for the geolocation and all this is we I think in India we are still stuck with that, though our government and many the agencies are working on it, but still to go on the level of geolocation, and there we all are stuck, to be honest.
Indeed, actually, as you just mentioned, the natural materials, your focus. There is also another issue with the materials wasted during the production processes, and I don't know if you are, following or recording information regarding to the materials used and wasted materials and what's happening to the wasted materials in your business or out of your business. That is also another issue that we need to deal.
Actually, India is also like a dump for by the European and US markets. They send a lot of wasted or rejected surplus plastics. And I was doing a research recently, and I was shocked to see that there are big, big warehouses where all the rejected plastics and all these raw materials that are not needed in Europe, they come almost free to India, and maybe it's going to also Africa. And it's huge, huge. And so what's happening with that? Of course, it's used in the recycling, what we call it. So we are making like bags, out of that for our use. Of course, the brand names are there, the big, big brands. So we don't know if we are promoting them. That's another conflict. But we have been making these bags. And then again, we have a lot of wasted raw material from the big textile industry. And there are certain markets where you can get the surplus and also the old saris. We call it sari is something what Indian wrapping, and we are using a lot to make our ropes, for example, and using it in our jewelry and also in our accessories. So this kind of work is also done, but we don't know how we can map it, because when I see the overall this big action of the multinational companies that they dump their they just send away all the what they don't need surplus in India. It's huge to find out, but there is a lot of use. People are using it, and we are also one of them to make our bags for that.
This is one of the main issues that actually the European Commission works on with this waste shipping regulation and relevant directives, waste framework directive, and they're trying to actually separate textile waste, and they're trying to improve the collection and sorting infrastructure at member state level, so that indeed textiles are sorted and exported if needed, but it is important for them to keep the materials in use with the circularity perspective and principles in the European Union. So limiting actually the waste exportation from Europe to Asia and Africa.
Yeah, it's not only from Europe, but also from US. And US laws are different from Europe. USA, there is not so strict and so awareness. I don't know as for policy it is or what, but in Europe there is, I think, more awareness about it. But the things are much bigger in problem than we know, perhaps, because when I say huge, huge, there is a whole export of second hand and old textile. We have a huge industry here which is selling the second hand, or it's I don't know, for it's almost the fashion is over, even it's new, that comes back to India. Even that in a
Actually,
big way.
the EU says that they're not trying to aiming to limit secondhand, and they are trying to promote secondhand in Europe as well as in other regions of the world. But indeed, they don't have information data on usable textiles. The only framework that enables them to collect information focuses on the wasted textiles at the stage. I know that we don't have much time, but maybe there's one other topic that I can mention, since Mikkel just shared with us that fair trade enterprises have strong connections with the members of their supply chain. So indeed, it is also important for us to map the actors in our supply value chains. So since brands will be collecting that data from us as well to report their value chain management practices. Is it a common practice to map the suppliers by fair trade enterprises? That could be the last question that I can ask at this stage.
If I may say, yes, supply chain that matters in fair trade, and we have to see from where our raw material is originated, from where it's coming. Of course, still, like in jewelry, there are certain contents, components like the metal. So that is, we cannot make. So it is an industrial product, but at the same time, we work for the glass beads, for example. So it's very important for us to know from where it's coming, and we have to get the information, how it's made. So it's handmade. And of course, the wages are very, very important right now, though this is also becoming a big question because in fair trade, the volumes are going down and the businesses are really struggling at the moment. And so on the one hand, we are having this 10 standards. On the other hand, the situation is much harder because there is not much work, and the situation is more difficult since in USA, from USA, since President Trump has imposed the import tariff on certain countries, including India, and they have very, very high tariffs. So it has really shaken the work. And if you go to the big companies, for example, maybe I don't know if I can say CNA or the Zara or Sadat, they have the compliance system, and it's very strict because they want GRS, they want God certificate, they want this, SADEX, BSCI. So everything is there. And of course, WFTO certification is not accepted by them. But the reality of working with them is very different because it's only about the profit and the time and the quality and the lowest price. So it's very hard and it's very conflicting. So the whole world is talking about circular economy and sustainable fashion, and they are claiming also, and that's why I think the new regulation may be good. We don't know how it's going to work, but the reality is very hard because there the price and highest efficiency and these things just matters. So in fair trade, we are very conscious about this, but the problem is there is not much work to sustain ourselves. So
I understand. Yes.
yeah.
Any other comments? Maybe is there any example to revise or adapt alternative design choices or business models? Mikkel also shared that Jeremy, I think they are upcycling plastic shreds, I think, waste. So any example that also um, uh, is parallel to the circular economy business models that are asked from the EU market?
If I can say, nobody says commenting.
Please,
But
please.
we are using a lot of recycled material, as we said, from the old or used or surplus plastic, and also the textiles. So, and we make different products from there. So we try to use as much as possible. Even in the stone handicrafts, the main minerals are taken away, and I don't know exact chemical name, and the waste is used to make the stone handicrafts. So of course there is very much awareness about that, and I think everybody is talking about it, and things are coming up. But I think all of us are trying to use the waste material and how we can make it into a craft or
Actually, I think this is quite important, especially the data and reporting the data. You know, you just shared with us that you use recycled material, wasted material, and indeed. Brands and customers, the market is asking for the percentage of that recycled content, and you know while we're discussing amongst us, it is good to be able to share the story. But if we can put these on paper, if we can report them, I think it is going to benefit fair trade enterprises much better, because this is what is asked actually from the producer. Yeah, Mikkel?
Yeah, sorry if I can both comment, and then I suppose we should wrap up since we're technically
Please.
over time.
Sure.
Thank you all for joining and for staying a bit longer. Thank you indeed, Moon, for sharing your perspectives. That's very interesting. And so I just wanted to comment a few things. One is, as Başak mentions, that's also why we believe that fair trade producers have an advantage, because most of the time, okay, of course, when with sustainability points, with green practices and so on, we have to be careful. But much of the time, it's not so much about changing so that you start doing it. It is rather that you find ways to document it and prove it, if you will. And that we hope to help make clearer for you during next year, when more of the criteria will be clarified. Now, you mentioned another important thing, like when you work with more mainstream suppliers, and it is a bit our hope that the ESPR and other EU regulation will help change that, what we generally see, namely that big, especially very big and dominant market players, just when there are new regulation of this kind, they just ask their producers to comply with it, but do not make any effort to assist them or support or even pay the additional cost infers for a business. And so hopefully the way that the ESPR is set up, this will be less possible, let's say. But okay, it never ceases to amaze anyone. I think the creativity that certain companies have in circumventing legislation and still avoiding risk and avoiding to have to pay for things, we understand. But these are also points that we are making in our advocacy efforts, and that we know the FTO is emphasizing, is to avoid the cascading of responsibilities, and namely that the responsibility will just be referred to the weakest party that cannot say no, which generally tend to be producers in India. For textiles, that's producers in India, generally speaking, and Bangladesh, Nepal, and so on. I think in terms of advice that we could give is just that, okay, they also you have to be very clear about and do research about what buyers you reach out to. There are fortunately buyers in Europe that have a higher awareness of this and understand that it also means additional costs for them and not just for the producers. And they have a specific contact with their consumers that, their customer base tends to value these kind of things higher. Unfortunately, still this type of customers is either, somewhat limited compared to more mainstream market, or just that we also assuming that there are more Europeans, especially, I'm speaking from the European perspective, still as the traditional market for fair trade. And I should say, because of the tariffs of the US to many countries, I think like producers in India, for example, are increasingly looking to the European market now instead of the US one. We are assuming that there are more consumers that are willing to pay more for this kind of things, but we haven't managed to reach them or establish the connection yet. So there are also some work to be done there. But that makes it even more important that, you either make these considerations if you don't already, or if you are making them, look into ways that you can document them, substantiate them, and make sure you have that information readily available to buyers in Europe, so that you don't just get as the first question, yeah, sure, you're sustainable, but everybody is these days. But what does that even mean? Can you show us what the sustainability looks like in your case? I think that's a little bit the disconnect we have with certain consumers that care about these things, but they're kind of disillusioned that, wants to scratch the surface a little bit of many companies who claim to be sustainable. It's, what does it amount to? It amounts to planting 3 trees, to offset your CO2 emissions or something like that. I'm being very, black and white and exaggerating, but this is a little bit the disillusion that there is, I think, with and then especially if they hear like, okay, so a fair trade company, there was a child found on in a cocoa plantation, so now they can't even trust fair trade anymore to be truly fair trade. I'm fearing that this is a little bit the sentiment we have to try to fight amongst certain consumers who are willing to pay more, but they are not necessarily convinced that certification really truly ensures that they are getting what they want to pay for, namely more sustainability. So especially documenting and being able to prove your claims will be really key. Hopefully, if the ESPR is implemented correctly, you will then have an advantage, because more mainstream companies will not be able to make spurious claims or vague claims that they can't then substantiate, because the criteria for what you're supposed to report and what the performance of your products is supposed to be will be much clearer and harder to kind of argue about. A lot of it will depend on the implementation, how the criteria evolve. We're looking into that, and as you can hear, we're also trying to influence that as best we can with exactly this kind of perspectives. But please, also for the rest of you and anyone watching the recording, please keep sharing these kind of perspectives, because they help us at Europe as well to make that case, the FTAO on our behalf, to make that case as part of the panel setting up the criteria. And so with that, I have tried to, and I see you got them, Maria, respond to some questions in the chat by text. So I think we'll leave it at there, leave it at that. Sorry, we'll leave it there, or we'll leave it at that. I just want to say thanks a lot for those of you who joined. I hope you found it useful. We have a survey actually that I'll just put in the chat, but we will also send it off to you by email afterwards. Just see. Of course, I closed down the window. If you'll just bear with me for 2 seconds, I will find it. And yeah, here we go. And hopefully you can begin filling it in already from the get-go, instead of having to wait till we send it out by email. We would really highly appreciate also, the link is now in the chat, also any feedback, of course, on how we could improve, or what especially kind of questions you like have answered in the toolkits outside of what we have covered in the presentation. please do let us know, and we can hopefully provide something that will be more relevant for you. Maybe I just also say that in this presentation today, we've been somewhat general. That is, of course, because going more into detail both requires more capacity and a lot more time. So I hope you will understand that the toolkits and this presentation are supposed to be really the way to inspire you in which ways to go. As we go along, as the criteria become more clear, we are happy to provide more concrete recommendations for the members. But at this stage, this is a bit maybe premature. You have a point, Moon, before we
Can we
close?
get a copy of your presentation?
Happy to share, yes. But I mean, this is information also supposed to be covered in the toolkit, so
And
you will
also
get that as well.
Yeah, fine, thank you. And also the link you have sent, you are sending it to our email
Yes.
address? Oh, that will be good. Yeah, thank you.
Good. But it's just to make sure that you don't then assume that the toolkits will then have all the solutions to all your questions necessarily. Unfortunately, we would love to do that, but that's maybe a little bit too much to assume, even amongst the best consultancies out there, I think are not possible or in a place to do that at this point. With that said, just to say there will be a follow-up, and we thank you very much for your participation, for your contributions,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
and see you again.